this tweet went kind of viral for all of the wrong reasons, and so I figured we should address it. Basically, this individual, Nintengod, posted the 30 FPS is unplayable narrative is one of the worst trends to ever happen in gaming. This asinine PC lames rhetoric. Maybe PC players are, they're saying they're lame. I'm not sure. Anyway, has you passing on great game experiences. Yet 95% of you can't tell the difference between 30 FPS and 60 FPS unless you're told beforehand. 30 FPS plays fine. First of all, let me say at the outset, I have defended 30 FPS games a lot. I don't think it's fair to like blindly dismiss a game purely because it runs at 30. Certain categories of games I won't be able to really play if they're at 30. Like I straight up can't do first person shooters at 30 FPS. They make me motion sick. It just does. My brain doesn't like it. And it makes me like after 15, 20 minutes, I like get hot and like kind of, it's almost like vertigo and my brain just cannot do it. I don't know why. Maybe I need to go see a doctor, but that's just how it is. So does that mean the game's bad? No. Like I also can't really play Doom games, like those id Tech shooter games. They also make me super motion sick for whatever reason. Even at like 100 plus frames a second, they just make me super, super nauseous. But that doesn't mean that Doom is bad. It just means that it's not for me for various reasons. And so I still would insist, just because a game runs at 30 does not mean that it's bad. I also don't really buy into the narrative nowadays that people say like if it doesn't have a 30 or if it doesn't have a 60 FPS mode, it's wholly unacceptable. I think resolutions are fair to hold to a standard. Like we're in 2024. I think it's fair to say 4K should be the standard. That's what was on all of the boxes for all of these modern consoles. It's all of the TVs and displays you're buying nowadays are 4K. So for a game not to be able to hit 4K, I think is broadly very disappointing. Very disappointing. At least if you like do 1440p and you upscale, at least then you're kind of hitting it. But games that are releasing at like 1440p flat, I think that's largely unacceptable. And I think more than anything, just offer a performance mode. Render at a lower resolution. It might look a little fuzzy and not great, kind of like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Performance mode on that is not great, but at least it lets you play at 60 if you want. So they offer you that option. But this part right here is just, I know it's probably hyperbole, but it is flatly ridiculous to suggest that 95% of people can't tell the difference between 30 and 60. 30 and 60 is really easy to tell the difference between. I'd say once you get to like 120 versus 140, maybe people would struggle. I think 144 to 240 will be even harder to tell the difference unless you've played games like that. You'll be able to tell once you start moving and playing the game, but that could perhaps be more fair. And then certainly like 240 to 360, that I think most people probably wouldn't really be able to tell much of a difference. It would really depend on the game and their experience with them. But 30 versus 60 is like super, super noticeable, like very, very noticeable. Let's see, FYI, the game is Nintendo's new IP, Astral Chain, developed by the Gods Platinum Games, highly rated and regarded as one of the best action games of all time. I just read that. Innovative, intense combat that is fluid, addictive, and amazing. Imagine calling yourself a gamer and skipping an absolute masterpiece because it's 30 FPS. Couldn't be me, never will be me. That's a fake gamer, PC tech zombie mindset. I will consume an all-timer without hesitation in all of its 30 FPS glory. A great game at 30 FPS is still a great game at 60 FPS. A shit game at 30 FPS is still a shit game at 60 FPS. Higher frame rate never determines whether a game is great or quality. PC simpletons focus on that because it makes them feel like they have an advantage over console gamers. Gaming revolves around console gamers. You PC clowns are the side chick. Know your role on the totem pole. Yeah, then there's also a community note, which I just find funny. A 2015 study suggests most people can discern higher frame rates when presented films at varying rates. Additionally, frame rate provides an objective difference in both skill and general enjoyment in the context of games, considerably more so than resolution. The reason I love seeing community notes like this, though, is because when your post is community noted, it's no longer eligible for monetization, which is primarily driven by the views on the tweet. So that's why you've probably seen an uptick in like rage baited posts or people just trying to get everybody really upset or pissed off at them. Because when the posts are retweeted by big YouTubers or by like big streamers and stuff, it increases the view count and then they get paid out based on that rage bait engagement. But when it's community noted, it no longer is eligible for revenue, which is kind of funny. However, all of this to say, I think it is totally fair to say that, where was it? A great game at 30 FPS is still a great game at 60, and a terrible game at 30 is still a terrible game at 60. Redfall, it's a bad game. I don't remember if they brought 60 FPS to it yet, but even at 60, that game will still be bad. Absolutely true. And a game that's really good at 30 will still be really good at 60. Absolutely. If you take Red Dead Redemption 2, you play it on console, and then you go over and you play it on PC at 60 frames plus, yeah, it's going to be even better. It's going to be great. Absolutely. I think the core discussion here, though, is like it goes to show you how you can be making a fair point, which absolutely fair to say that 30 FPS is unplayable. Is a narrative. It's one of the worst trends to ever happen in gaming. I don't know if it's a trend beyond just like Twitter. I think Starfield showed that even on 30 at 30 FPS, people will still play games even if they were throwing fits about it. People are like, no, if Bethesda releases Starfield at 30 FPS, the game's gonna flop. It ended up having millions and millions and millions of players. People largely just didn't really care, and they got over it pretty damn quickly. It's once again another reminder that Twitter isn't real, or sorry, X isn't real, and it amplifies voices beyond and out of proportion. So you'll have a very, very vocal minority that might be just 2,000 people, but in the context of the gaming industry, 2,000 people is nothing. That's a rounding error. But on Twitter or X, you can make a lot of noise with 2,000 people that are all retweeting each other's stuff and promoting it and getting in a tizzy. So just remember, X isn't real. Nothing is legitimate. However, it goes to show you that just because you make a valid point, which I think this is a absolutely valid point, 30 FPS is not unplayable. But if you make one like hyperbolic or bad faith statement trying to poison the well, it immediately discredits the rest of your argument. You know, the whole thing falls apart. If you're a little disingenuous at one stage in your whole paper, basically, the rest of the paper is thrown out because people are like, well, if you were disingenuous there, I'm not going to take you that seriously elsewhere. So be careful when you're making I think a very fair statement, and then you throw in something hyperbolic that allows people to immediately dismiss your opinion. And I mean, even like Mudahar, I think this is just funny. If you can't see the difference between 30 and 60, you need to see a doctor, LMAO. Yeah, I would agree. Now, you might not care. That's a different thing. Some people just don't care. My wife, Nikki, she really doesn't care. Like I'll be playing a game and I'll be like, do you want to try performance mode? And I'll swap it over to performance mode and let her play it. She's like, I don't know, it looks kind of blurry. Switch it back. Like she just does not care about the frame rate. It just doesn't matter to her. And I do think there's a lot of players and gamers like that honestly just don't really care. And that's fine. That's fine. But they can tell the difference. They just don't think the difference is worth switching and making the other sacrifices for. I do think the trend to push past 30 is a reflection of something else we did another segment on earlier in the week, which is that I do think there's a lot of people that are broadly frustrated with the lack of notable like leaps and bounds in performance in gaming right now. Like it really does feel as though for the last 4 years that we've been in this console generation, there really has not been a whole lot of massive leaps and improvements in performance. Like, at least with the PS4 gen, like if I look up Uncharted 3 versus Uncharted 4, look at this. I mean, you can tell huge leaps and bounds from Uncharted 3 to Uncharted 4. Graphically, in terms of what you're actually able to do with larger crowds, in terms of what you're able to do with gameplay, like all sorts of stuff. It's just massively improved console generation over console generation. And it feels like with the PS5 gen, we haven't really seen huge leaps like that. The biggest thing we've gotten are like SSDs are faster, so you get faster load times. We've seen that improved. Haptic feedback's cool, but it really does not feel like we've seen the same type of notable improvement. And I think that that's reflected in this frame rate discussion where a lot of people are like, if we're not getting huge graphical leaps, we should be getting 60 FPS. Let's do that. And so they've started to demand and expect 60 FPS from publishers and developers. And so when they don't get it, it's seen as a huge miss, even though the game might have been built from the ground up starting 6 years ago before the PS5 even launched. and before the Series X and everything else. And they might have been like, yeah, no, we're not going to target 60. All of these greatest games of all time have been at 30. So Red Dead 2 just launched, and we're going to launch at 30 just like that, and it's going to be great. And then they get people on Reddit and X upset. But again, I mean, Twitter and X aren't real. And Reddit is, an echo chamber as well. So you just end up with people that sound very loud, but aren't actually, I think, representative of the broader community. A lot of dev tools have been made to make things easier and quicker for devs and artists, not more performant. Thus, devs don't know how to optimize as proper anymore. Tech artists speaking here. That's really interesting on Earthly Whales. And I think that that's also something you can see a lot in these Unreal Engine 5 games or Unreal Engine 4 games as well, where they're big and in cutscenes and stuff, they can look really beautiful. And technologically speaking, they're very impressive, but it doesn't actually seem like there's a lot of optimization going on. And it's probably because they're building kind of with blocks instead of more minutely controlling each and everything. I think it was it Callisto Protocol? I'm trying to remember which game it was. There was one Unreal Engine game. You guys will have to remind me which it was. But there was an Unreal Engine game where they were describing how they were using the blueprint system for all of these like animations and logics and stuff while building the game. And as they got closer to launch, they were going to go back through and redo all of those blueprints kind of by hand to rewrite them to be more efficient. But in the process of doing that, they ended up breaking everything. Maybe it was Redfall. Maybe Redfall's what I'm thinking of. But they spoke about it very openly, or at least a couple of devs did, and basically broke down that, yeah, no, the game was running pretty good and everything was working. And then we went back in to optimize it and broke everything. everything kind of fell apart, and I think that that's something we've seen a lot. So that would absolutely make sense. Also, thank you, Mark, for the 10. Very generous. TV technology has advanced so much that any 30 FPS game, especially on an OLED, is rough. You will see every frame drop. Everything is fine when you stand still, but the minute you turn the camera, yeah, it kind of depends on the settings. I think bigger displays, higher quality displays usually would warrant higher quality inputs. But again, like, it's why we did that segment just the other day on that Tale of Two Brothers. Is that what it's called? Yeah, we did this clip, and it's basically just like a breakdown of this, but straight up with the dynamic resolution on the Series S, this game will run at 806 by 454. That is sub 720p, like by a lot. And granted, it's on the Series S, which is the weakest console besides like the Switch, of course, kind of on the market right now. But still, the Series S is effectively just kind of an amped up 1X from the end of the last generation in terms of power. That's at least how it's been described to me. So it's insane to see that we are getting games releasing now that can dynamically change the resolution even down to sub 720p levels. It's amazing. Yeah, it's sub 480p. Like if you were trying to watch YouTube videos in 2009 had higher fidelity than that. And granted, it's like, it's a different thing. It's dynamic resolution. It's, games are more demanding, and it's certainly more graphically impressive than what you would get back in the day. But still, the fact that that's allowed to be released to the public is amazing to me. Like, you would think if they were looking at it and they're like, hey guys, we can't get this running above like 454p in these really busy scenes, so we need to delay the game until we can get it running better in these really intense sequences. Otherwise, like, the game's just going to look terrible on the Series S. But I think it's also a reflection of sort of a complacency, because they can put it out like this and gamers seem to be okay with it. And I that's why I think it's more fair to be upset about the resolution shortcomings than it is to be upset about like the frame rate stuff. Because when you have the game optimized well enough that the resolution can be done properly, it seems like optimization at that point is just a scalable issue. And so I think you'll get better results kind of demanding higher resolutions than you will for higher frame rates. Because with higher frame rates, all they do is they come in with like FSR2 or something. They render it at like 360p and then try to upscale it back up to 4K. And it looks terrible, but they hit 60 FPS, whoop, whoop. But it's just unacceptable to me. Digital Foundry was a mistake. I think they kind of opened a lot of people's eyes to kind of the inner workings of games. And what I've noticed is a lot of gamers have opinions on this stuff, but they've lacked the vocabulary because they don't work in game development. They don't work in TV sales or in media creation. So they don't know how to describe, like, it looks blurry. It looks blurry to me, and it looks sharp at sometimes, but then it looks blurry at others. Like, you can kind of describe that. But then when you watch something like Digital Foundry and they explain to people, no, what that is, you're right, you are seeing that. And what it is a dynamic variable resolution. So it changes resolution to hit different frame rate targets, and it's dropping all the way down to this resolution when you go into this scene. And so it gives people the words to describe what they're seeing, you know. I do agree sometimes it can be, I think people can go too far where they're like, oh, well, you know, I tried to count the pixels on this screen and it seems that and like, they don't really know what they're doing. You know, Digital Foundry has a lot of tools they use for this stuff. So I just don't think it's generally fair, but Series S hate is fair. The X is actually a really good console. I agree. The X is a really good console. The S is just the lowest common denominator for this generation. And there is reason to believe, and argumentation, I think, that could be made to say that the Series S has actually like single-handedly held back AAA cross-platform gaming this generation. I know like Xbox will not agree with that, but it seems to be the case pretty clearly that if you have to bring your game to a console that's barely more powerful than the last generation console, you're just going to end up making games that are basically last generation games in terms of how they utilize the technology, because it has to run on the potato. So you got to figure out how to get it running on the potato. And releasing it was just such a huge miscalculation. I don't know what the hell they were thinking. I mean, I do know what they were thinking. I shouldn't say that. What they were thinking is it can be really useful to have a cheaper budget option for the console. And there are people elsewhere in the world, outside of like first world countries especially, where, shocker, 4K 75-inch TVs are not the norm. Okay, so like making a console available that runs at, you know, targeting maybe 1080p to 1440p, that will be good for them because they can get it cheaper and it's not overkill for their displays and stuff. I can understand that. I just think in the context of a console generation that's supposed to go 7-8 years, it was a bit of a blunder because it ended up holding everything else back. And we saw it. I mean, even with freaking Baldur's Gate 3, they couldn't release it on Xbox, not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't get the damn game running on the Series S. So they're like, yeah, I guess we just don't release on Xbox at all until we figure it out, if we can. And they had to go get a special exception from Phil Spencer, allowing them to release 2 different versions, one version on the Series X and one version on the Series S. And, you know, it's unbelievable that anybody could still be arguing that it's not a problem, especially when we have the example of Baldur's Gate from like the guy that runs the company that makes the game. And he's like, no, we straight up couldn't get it running on the Series S. So unless we get an exception, we can't release on the Xbox. And so they made an exception and they allowed them to do it. But I think that it would fracture the Xbox community, which is why they don't do it. But I think if you really wanted to empower devs, you would have it so like, it's kind of like different iPhone models where you have some apps or some games and things that work really well with the iPhone versus, or like the iPhone Pro Max, whatever, versus the cheaper models, because it's more powerful. It's a different thing. Just like, you know, when you buy a PC, it's like, oh, this game needs this graphics card to run it. I don't have that graphics card. I can't run it. Bummer. That sucks. I guess I'll just have to wait till I upgrade it. And it's going to be the same thing with Series S. It's like, yeah, you got a cheaper console, but it can't run necessarily everything that is pushing the graphical boundaries. But again, they don't really want that. They don't want to partition members of their community out, which makes sense. I mean, I get it, but he took my thing. Red flag.